finally, Loki is officially, canonically, which is now a word, bisexual in the MCU. Or is he gender fluid? I don't give a... Honestly, neither should you. And here's why. So to premise this, I love Norse mythology. I genuinely love Norse mythology. It is one of the few topics that I would say I'm actually an expert. I have studied it, I have qualifications in it, I've written a book, Loki, God of Rage. Absolutely fantastic, very relevant to this video. Head on over to Amazon after you finish watching this video and get it for yourself. It's amazing, and if you're on Kindle Unlimited, it's for free. Shameless plug out the way. I truly love Norse mythology. I love the stories. I love the language that's used, and a testament to the translators over the years for paying attention to the language that's used. I also love comic book and comic story. In fact, that yellow thing is the Infinity Gauntlet that I got from Loot Crate. I genuinely love comic books. I love these ways of telling story. That being said, I've never really been a fan of how Marvel, not just the MCU, but Marvel Comics in general, have treated the Norse pantheon. There are some really interesting differences that I think are really cool for storytelling. Like Mjolnir, for example. The fact that in the MCU and in Marvel Comics, Mjolnir can only be wielded by someone who is worthy. You throw it and you can call it back. That's a really cool gimmick, and that's a really interesting story device that doesn't really exist in the actual Norse pantheon. See, in actual Norse mythology, you don't have to be worthy, you just have to be physically strong enough to lift Mjolnir. It's a heavy old chunk. Not many people can do it, but there are people and giants who have done it. In fact, Thor's hammer has been stolen a few times. And actually, that story is actually relevant to something I want to get to later on in this video. That being said, these interesting gimmicks and storytelling devices are few and far between for me. Personally, I just don't really get on. I think out of the 3 Thor films we got, I only really liked Ragnarok, which is a very popular opinion, but even then I could only do it by ignoring Norse mythology. I think when they originally came up with the idea of using Norse mythology, I think they really missed a trick here by having Loki as Thor's adopted brother instead of Odin's blood brother like he is in the comic books. I think it would have been far interesting to explore that route. The fact that the Norse pantheon hate Loki for what he is, and what he is the embodiment of change. Now, I've actually wanted to do a video on Loki for a long time. This will not be it. The reason is, while there are a number of videos about Loki on YouTube, I feel like they all miss something really important. But again, this video is about his sexuality, not about him. This video is about the absurd reaction to Loki's sexuality in the MCU or in the comics. What's really prompted me to make this video is actually watching someone else's video. Now, I'm not going to name them because I don't think they come off particularly well in this video. As much as I do love that person's channel and consume their content on an almost daily basis, I think their simplification of it is wrong. You see, in their video they said, yes, in the Norse mythology he does this, gets the giggity on with a horse, hey, but in the comic books it's this and this. I think the source material plays a bigger role, and again, obviously I'm going to say that because I think the source material is better. I genuinely think the majority of what we've got from the MCU and from Marvel Comics is trash compared to what we could have had if they stuck closer to the actual Norse mythology. I just don't like it. So to prove my point of how little this actually matters, I could regale you with the story that practically everyone knows in part, if nothing else. And the story is of how the wall of Asgard was actually built. It's an interesting story, and for me it tells you more about the characteristics of the Aesir, how less than good they are, how childish they can be, and how manipulative they can be when all's said and done. But again, people for the most part already know the highlights of this story. Loki turns himself into a female horse, does the giggity with a male horse, and there we have Sleipnir, Odin's magnificent 8-legged steed. Always makes me laugh, always. Point is, most people already know that story. When I think about Loki, I have to remember the language that is used to describe Loki, because that's really important. There are masculine and feminine words in the world. Now, people who only speak English and don't know other languages aren't really exposed to this, because English words are just words. But in numerous languages around the world, past and present, a word can be masculine or feminine. The moon is feminine. Legs are masculine. I personally don't fully understand this, but I am aware of it, and it is important when you're creating a sentence. So when we look at how Loki is described in Nordic tales, in Norse mythology, it's important to pay very close attention to the language that's used. Because the language that's used to describe Loki is feminine. He uses magic. In the Norse pantheon, using magic is a feminine trait. In fact, aside from Loki, the only other male in the Norse universe who uses magic is Odin. And quite frankly, people kind of look down at him for using magic. Now, he's Odin, he doesn't really give a fuck, but the point is, he's the only other male who uses magic. When it comes to shape-shifting abilities, Loki tends to take the form of female inherited animals. And by that I mean he will turn into a fox, as opposed to an eagle. There is actually a story about the mead of poetry, where Odin's done some shady shit, because Odin is Odin, that's what he does, but he turns himself into an eagle. Mighty eagle, an eagle being a masculine animal. Loki's turned himself into a fox, which is viewed more as a feminine creature. Loki himself will turn himself into a woman. He turned himself into a female horse in the story I just told you about. But in fact, the story I alluded to at the start of this video, Thor's hammer is stolen by a giant. Now, it's stolen because this giant wants to leverage Thor's hammer so that he can win the hand of Freya. Like with numerous stories like this, it's always to impress Freya. Everyone wants to marry Freya, and quite frankly, I think you should read Odd and the Frost Giants by Neil Gaiman, because that puts a whole new spin on it. But the point is, the plan is put in place to retrieve the hammer, where Thor goes in disguise to retrieve his hammer, disguises himself as Freya. Now, Thor objects to this right off the bat. Doesn't want to shave his beard, doesn't want to do anything like that, because men have beards. Can't shave a beard. Loki doesn't really care about that though. And it's interesting when you read these stories, or if you have them on Audible or something like that, and you listen to these stories, the way that Thor is described with these masculine features, with these masculine words, Loki is going with him. Loki is quite happy to turn himself into a woman. Not just wear the dress of one, which Thor protested against anyway, but he's happy to physically change his body into a woman's body. And throughout that whole saga, Thor is referred to in masculine traits, and Loki is referred to in feminine traits. Loki is also described as wise and cunning. These are traits that are attributed to women, not to men. Doesn't matter if they're good or if they're bad, Loki is almost always described either in neutral traits or feminine traits. And again, he's very happy to disguise himself as a woman, as feminine creatures. I mean, in actually one of my favorite books, Odd and the Frost Giants, Odin, Loki and Thor are turned into animals. Odin is turned into an eagle, a masculine animal. Thor is turned into a bear, a masculine animal. Loki is turned into a fox, a feminine animal. And it's this way, not just in this story, but throughout all Norse stories. Again, I'm not going into what Loki actually means to the Norse pantheon, but what I am saying is that from the start, it's not just a comical story about how Loki had sex with a male horse and gave birth to their offspring. Throughout Loki's incarnation of Nordic tales, he is described almost exclusively either as neutral or feminine traits. He does not care one way or the other. It doesn't bother him. The only real issue when it comes to shape-shifting, turning your body into someone else's, is becoming too entrenched into that character and not wanting to go back. In the story of Ragnarok, in the build-up to it and Baldur's death, Loki has no issue turning himself into a woman. None whatsoever, because he doesn't care. The only issue that Loki has is how long he stays in that changed form. Because once you change into something, maybe you're happier. These are the things that the MCU and Marvel Comics in general miss out on, which is why the Marvel interpretation of Nordic figures, the Nordic pantheon, is crap. So for all those people who are on one side of this argument saying it's horrible and they shouldn't have touched it because blah blah bollocky blah, yeah, they did. So what? You should embrace the source material because the source material is better. And for those on the other side of this who are championing this as a win and as something fantastic, pump your brakes, because not only is the show shit, but also the representation isn't that great. Loki in this show is a joke, and it's honestly why I stopped watching. Yes, I like Tom Hiddleston. I think he's a really good actor, and I do somewhat enjoy his portrayal of Loki, even if I do think what he's been given to work with is crap. But it's not a good story. They could have done so much better, and they have done so much better. If you want to watch something that actually has good representation and is along the lines of Norse mythology, honestly, I would recommend American Gods. Neil Gaiman, same guy who wrote Odd and the Frost Giants, adores Norse mythology probably as much as me, if not a little bit more. And it is so beautifully done in American Gods. It truly, truly is. Especially if you haven't seen any of it and you are a massive Loki fan, I promise you, by the time you get to the end of season 3, you will be screaming just as I was with the big reveal. It's fantastic and it's subtle, and it could have only been done by someone who genuinely loves Norse mythology. Aside from that, if you want to pick up some great archery merchandise, I'll leave my affiliate link down below. You don't have to use it, but it's brilliant if you do, and I will owe you a beer. That's always good. Even a whiskey, hell, even some honey mead. Links to my book will also be down below, as well as links to get this fantastic Fear t-shirt. Face everything and rise. Thanks very much for watching, guys. Keep safe, and I'll see you next time. Bye bye.